In today's new episode, we speak with ABC News correspondent John Quiñones about the disappearance and murder of Vanessa Guillén from Fort Hood in Texas. And of course, this happened in 2020. And now John is working on a fantastic podcast series called Vanished: What Happened to Vanessa? And you can get that now in your favorite podcatcher. All right, everyone, we're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with John Quiñones. We are lucky enough to be joined by John Quiñones. John, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Good to meet you guys. Good, Tim and Lance. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on. You have done such an amazing job with such a tragic story. It's actually one of the stories that Tim and I have covered really, really briefly because there's just so much depth to it and there's just so much pain to it. But for anyone, for the very few, the handful of people who are not familiar with you, do you mind introducing yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yes, I'm a correspondent for ABC News for 2020, primarily a lot of true crime stories. But I've been at ABC more than 40 years, working on all kinds of breaking news. I covered Central America when I started with ABC because I speak Spanish, and I was in Nicaragua and El Salvador, working with Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel and Barbara Walters and Diane. So I've been there a long time. I was based in Miami for ABC News. But prior to that, I was born and raised in San Antonio, Mexican-American. Didn't speak English till I was 6 years old and went to the first grade of school. And I always had a dream of being a reporter. I always wanted to shine a light on stories that I felt weren't being covered, particularly in my community there on the west side of San Antonio. All the news that was coming out of there was so negative about gangs and violence and drugs. And I knew we had heroes in those communities. I knew them myself. But no one was reporting that, right? And I loved radio broadcasting, so I started in radio. I couldn't get a job in television in Texas for years, so I went back to grad school after graduating from a little university in San Antonio. I got a fellowship out of the blue, thank God, because I wouldn't have been able to afford it. We were very poor. My dad was a janitor in San Antonio. My mom used to clean houses on the rich part of town. And no one in my family had ever gone to college. But there was a government program, an anti-poverty program called Upward Bound, that allowed me to go to this little university in San Antonio. And then I got my first internship at a country music radio station. But again, I wanted to do television and no one would hire me. So I applied to Columbia University in New York, the Graduate School of Journalism. And lo and behold, I was accepted. And not only that, I got a fellowship, thank God, because I wouldn't be able to afford it. And my first job was in Chicago as a local TV reporter back in the 80s. And then I was there for 3 years, and ABC picked me up after I won an Emmy Award for swimming across the Rio Grande undercover, pretending to be an immigrant, trying to get to the U.S. I wanted to tell the story about, what is it like? What are the push factors that make immigrants come to this country? How bad must things be in their home country for them to risk their lives swimming across the Rio Grande or crossing the desert in Arizona to come get a job here as a busboy or dishwasher, roofer, landscaper,
janitor,
for very little money? So that was and that story won an Emmy, and it brought me to the attention of ABC.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I just interrupted you because it was a moment of inspiration. You were talking about these jobs that immigrants would come over, and you said your father was a janitor, and he and your mom raised you, and you've gone on to tell these incredible stories, and you wanted to represent your community because you saw that there were heroes, and this misrepresentation that all the gang representation, that's what it all was. And I remember we're so far removed, we're from New England, but watching the news, it's all you get is what you see in the news. Yeah. And the question I want to ask, and it's probably a super obvious one, but I'm really interested to hear your answer. Your decision to immerse yourself in that life of an immigrant coming over illegally, crossing the border because they want to make a better life for themselves, next to your passion for showcasing a community that is misrepresented. Like, how important is that to just like the building of what America is?
It's a no-brainer. I mean,
Yeah, right.
the country would be nothing without the immigrant labor. Should we deport criminals? Of course, anyone who breaks the law, that goes without saying. But there's got to be a better way to handle this, because I know that this country depends on immigrant labor, and it taught me. I got a job as part of this story. I not only swam across the Rio Grande. Remember, this is sort of stationed in Chicago, right? So we wanted to make it of local interest to that audience in Chicago, because I was just a local reporter in Chicago. A big deal because it's a big market, but nonetheless, it was just in Chicago. So after I explained what it was like getting on an inner tube, I paid a coyote, a smuggler, $300 on hidden camera. He thought I was just another Mexican crossing the border, right? I spoke only Spanish, I dressed down, and I was also 27 years old. I looked the part of a young immigrant trying to, jump the fence or cross the desert or swim across the Rio Grande. And I found the coyote, who for $300, he didn't care. He said, "Okay, give me $300. I'll sell you a social security card and a birth certificate." And he puts me on an inner tube, guys. And I floated across the Rio Grande, all captured on camera, because my camera, the CBS camera crew, was on the Texas side of the Rio Grande filming me at sunset. But I didn't stop there. I went to Chicago, and you talk about the immigrant labor and the importance of it. I got a job at a restaurant where we had heard that the owner of this restaurant had 7 undocumented workers working for him, and he had not paid them in 17 weeks. And every time they complained, he would say, "Hey guys, you get to sleep here in the basement. You get to eat all the food you want here. If you keep complaining, I'll call immigration, ICE, and have you deported." Well, that happens in America today, right? More than ever. This was 40 years ago. So I got a job there. I pretended that I just arrived from Mexico in my broken English. I pretended. I met with the owner, and he hires me as another one of his dishwashers. So I didn't work there long, only a day or two. But with a hidden camera, I documented my work, bussing tables at this restaurant on the outskirts of Chicago with the other 7 undocumented workers. And then at night, I slept down in the basement with him. And I still wonder what they must have thought, because by day I'm washing dishes with them. And then at night, I pulled out a little camera and I started interviewing them in Spanish about their lives. And through tears, they explained how they were being held, against their will, almost as prisoners in that restaurant. The next day I came back to work, this time wearing a suit, speaking fluent English with a camera crew behind me. And I remember we had to chase the owner of the restaurant through the parking lot because he didn't want to talk to me about what he was doing to those workers. But the day after my story aired on the local station in Chicago, me swimming across the Rio Grande, taking a bus back to Chicago, working at that restaurant, the day after it aired, the US government moved in, they shut down the restaurant, and they arrested the owner of the restaurant, and they got the Mexican workers the money they were owed and temporary visas to remain here while they worked on their residency. And I knew then that those were the kinds of stories, because of my own background, because of that other language that I happen to speak, because I look the way I do. I could tell those stories perhaps better than other people because I understood the culture. And that story won my first Emmy Award, local Emmy Award in Chicago, and ABC News was watching from New York. There were very few Latinos on national television, except Geraldo Rivera, who was on 2020. Uh, and they were looking for someone to go cover Central America out of the Miami bureau for ABC. And so was CBS, by the way, and NBC and CNN, because there were wars raging in Nicaragua, El Salvador, civil wars. And we had a correspondent at ABC by the name of Bill Stewart, who was this great reporter from New York who was sent to cover the war in Nicaragua. And he was shot and killed on camera by the soldiers down there because he couldn't communicate with them. the networks then all said, Jesus, we should hire someone who speaks Spanish to go to Latin America. So they hired me and a few others, and that's how my career started. Funny, because I used to get punished for speaking Spanish in school. The coach had a big old wooden paddle with holes drilled in it for extra speed and power, and they would give us 3 spankings on our rear ends in elementary school if they caught us speaking Spanish, right? Can you imagine what that does to your image of your native tongue? It tells you that it's not good enough, right? It doesn't compare to English. But it's so ironic that the kid who used to get punished for speaking Spanish in school winds up getting his network television job back in the 80s precisely because I spoke Spanish, and I hope because I was a decent reporter. But I spent 10 years traipsing throughout Latin America for ABC News out of the Miami Bureau, and for Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel and the great people of ABC. But that's how I connect with it, because of where I come from. I've been able to tell stories because I witnessed some of this myself. And who better to tell those stories than someone who's been there?
Well, it's an incredible background, and we really appreciate you joining us and sharing some of that. That is really interesting. And you know firsthand the power of media and what that can do to a story and change it. And you have been covering the story of Vanessa Guillén on a podcast called Vanished, What Happened to Vanessa. And this is a story you've been covering closely for years now. Can you tell us a little bit about this story and about your interest in it?
Yeah, it's a story that was very, very special to me, close to my heart, because it's a tragedy that happened just a couple of hours from my hometown of San Antonio, Texas. And it happened on a military base at Fort Hood on the morning of April 22nd, 2020. A Mexican-American soldier, Private First Class Vanessa Guillén, simply disappears while working on the American base, right? She was working in an arms room, logging weapons. And that morning at around 9 a.m., Vanessa texted her boyfriend, who was already her fiancé, Juan Cruz, back in their hometown of Houston. And she said to him, she just sent a very short text saying, I have to work in a few minutes. That was the last message she ever sent to her family. She went missing for weeks upon weeks. Her family's pleading for answers, demanding answers from military officials, asking, how could this happen, right? How could this happen on a military base within the confines, within the gates of Fort Hood? The Guillén family starts organizing protests because they were not getting answers, they felt, from the military or from local law enforcement in that town of Killeen, Texas. They organized protests and marches led by the 3 women who are amazing, closest to her. Her mother, Gloria, her sisters, Myra, and her little sister, Lupe. And the story just blows up on social media. I first heard about Vanessa's disappearance when the actress Salma Hayek posted a picture of her on Instagram saying, "Bring us back, Vanessa," vowing to keep posting new pictures of her until Vanessa was found. So we started doing a little research. My nephew in San Antonio kept calling me saying, "John, are you watching this story?" And the local news was covering it, right? But not much of the network interest or national interest. So I started doing some research, and we wound up doing 2 documentaries on 2020 on television on Vanessa. And in my interviews with her family, they told me that shortly after she had been assigned to Fort Hood, they saw a marked change in Vanessa. She seemed worried and depressed. She wasn't eating right. She was losing weight. And then she confides in her mother, Gloria, that she was being sexually harassed by a sergeant in her unit there at Fort Hood. Again, no answers. The search continues for her for more than 2 months. And then finally, heartbreakingly, the remains are discovered in June of 2020. Her body had been dismembered, burned, and buried in 3 different makeshift grave sites. I had to tell that story.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Yeah, it is a rough story once you start peeling back the layers of it, and telling it the way you tell it is incredible. And I'm wondering how the impact, or what was like, how did the element of it being on a military base and closely connected to the U.S. military impact the way you told that story? Because if this had happened, like if she had been a member of the NFL, where it's a heavily like masculine environment, and the same thing happened, there might be a similarity there, but this is the U.S. military. How did
Yeah.
that impact the storytelling?
I mean, first of all, how the heck do you get onto a base without,
Exactly.
right? I mean, heavy security. You can't go beyond the gates of Fort Hood without special permission. And the authorities at that point, even the Criminal Investigation Division, which is the heavy investigative unit of the military, uh, didn't have all the answers. They had been deceived. They were sent off on tangents. Um, First of all, a fellow soldier, Aaron Robinson, he was the last person to see Vanessa because he had been working with her in that arms room. It turns out in the end that he was formally charged because he lied about where he was that night. He said that, and then three other soldiers reported seeing her that afternoon on the military base when they initially thought she had disappeared in the morning. It turns out those soldiers were mistaken. Aaron Robinson, this guy who worked with her, said, "No, I went home. I spent the night with my girlfriend." So they were sent off on tangents, and it was hard to get answers from them, and they didn't want to talk too much about it initially.
And how did Vanessa's family react to Vanessa's disappearance?
Oh man, this is a story of a family that just, would not give up, especially those three women seeking justice. They went on social media, and the story then inspires an international movement with that hashtag that we might all remember, I am Vanessa Guillén. And it sparked a reckoning within the entire military. They started protesting. They went to Washington. They did protests outside the gates at Fort Hood. Her mother, Gloria, just wouldn't give up. Vanessa's mother, when Vanessa had confided in her that she was being sexually harassed, she said, "Tell me who that person is. I'm going into that base and I'm going to confront them." And Vanessa then calmly told her mom, "Mom, this is not the way it works. This is the military. You can't just barge in there." But they were relentless in how they were trying to seek any answers. And again, social media, man, it just caught fire. And in this new episode, and the 6-part series that we're doing now, you will hear never before heard interviews with the family and from the Pentagon. You'll hear from Vanessa's sister Myra, who led the charge, who tells me that, and by the way, she's considering running for Congress even, although she's putting it on hold right now. And she says that the Guillén family just remains proud of what they've done to try to shine a light on this issue, which then, the media, the local media started calling Vanessa's mom Mama Guillén, and because she kind of represented all moms for all the other, people who had gone missing or had been misclassified as AWOL. I asked her, I have a note here where it says, I asked her, why do they call you Mama Guillén? And she says, because they call me that because in all the newspapers. And why? Because I am the mother of all their daughters, because there's no mom like the one who defends her child. And I told you, since I was a little girl, she says, I was taught that a child is your child for your entire life. You never abandon a child. You fight for them. That's how the mom handled it. And that's why she would never give up.
Oh, that's incredible. And Myra had some pretty strong feelings once Vanessa went missing and she was actually with Aaron Robinson. Can you tell us about what she thought about Aaron Robinson's behavior?
Well, when she finds that, when she's not getting a response by text or answers on the phone from Vanessa that day she went missing, Myra says, "That's it. I'm going to drive to Fort Hood to look for my sister." So she got her one of her sisters and Vanessa's boyfriend, the fiance Juan Cruz, and they jumped in their car and they started driving 3 hours from their home in Houston to Fort Hood. And when they get there like at midnight. The person leading the investigation is asleep, and he says, "Don't bother me right now. We'll talk in the morning. I can't talk to you right now. We'll come back in the morning." So they get a hotel room, and they go to they come again in the morning, and that's when they are ushered into this room with a couple of soldiers and officers, and among them is this guy Aaron Robinson, who was the last to see her. No one knows last to see Vanessa, and no one knows that he had anything to do with it at that point because it's the day after. And what strikes Myra is that while they were in that room talking about, asking for seeking answers, this guy who ultimately, said he killed her, was laughing, and it struck Myra because he would look at her and then just break out in laughter. And Myra felt like, why? What's wrong with you? My sister's disappeared. Why are you acting this way? So right away, it struck her as very, very odd.
Yeah. How do you, as a reporter, journalist, and someone who's following a code of ethics professionally, dig into this and separate the emotion from the reporting?
You just ask for the truth. I mean, in the end, it helped that I could speak Spanish. Vanessa's mother, Gloria, didn't, and her father, Rogelio, did not speak English. So it gave me a bit of an edge as a network correspondent, because again, Univision and the Spanish language stations had been doing it already, and local television, of course. But we were the first major network to get involved. I drove right away to Houston. I went to their house, and it just reminded me so much of my own upbringing. She lived in the barrio on the east side of Houston. I lived in the barrio on the west side of San Antonio. My mom didn't speak much English, just like Vanessa's mother. When I opened the door, they invited me right away. And of course, I spoke Spanish to her, and that ingratiated me a little bit, and it opened her up a little bit more to know that I could connect with her, relate to her. And I smell tortillas being cooked just like in my own home by my mom. They invite me to lunch. And then I noticed that in their living room, they had an altar to the Virgin of Guadalupe, which is the patron saint of Mexico. My mom had that same altar with candles lit. But in this case, Gloria Guillén already had pictures of her daughter, her missing daughter, up on the wall all around the altar. So I still asked him the tough questions. Could any? I just wanted to know what they knew, and they knew at that point very little because they were being told very little. I don't think there was any kind of question as to whether I could do it, without bias. It was a woman suffering, in a family in turmoil and worried desperately about their daughter. So it was easy to get her to open up to me. And then, of course, we got the other side of the story. We went to the Pentagon and we did as much as we could with military officials. The beauty of doing it for 2020 is that we have more time. We weren't under the gun of having to do a 2-minute story that night on the evening news, as we often do, and there's a beauty to doing those stories. But with these documentaries that we do, we have time, and if the family didn't feel like they wanted to talk in that moment, and often they don't because they're being inundated by media. They never had this kind of experience, right? Banging on their door, throwing microphones in their faces. In our case, I was able to tell them, look, if you don't feel like talking right now, we can come back. I can come back tomorrow. Here's my cell phone. And so that made it a bit easier. And as we started digging into the story, we found out that there have been questions about the alarming number of other soldier deaths at Fort Hood, including death by suicide. In 2020, the same year that Vanessa went missing, 13 Fort Hood soldiers reportedly died by suicide. This included the case of Elder Fernandez, the soldier who killed himself after reporting sexual abuse to his command. The Army later said it couldn't substantiate his allegations. But in the 4 years before Vanessa's disappearance, more Fort Hood soldiers, we learned, had died in homicides there at the base than in battle. And in 2020, the year that she did go missing, there were at least 28 Fort Hood soldiers who died, vanished, and in one case turned up dead after going missing. So there was a real problem. That went beyond Vanessa Guillén.
Yeah, the fact that more soldiers die within what should be the confines of their safe environment than in battle, which is why they're being trained in the first place, is mind-blowing to me. That you're being trained to go into battle and possibly likely die or get seriously maimed, injured, but the numbers show that no, you're more likely to die here within these walls. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was really crazy. And I got to say, the military, the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, allowed me to do an interview with him in the Pentagon. That's unheard of. And he admitted that there were some issues, at the base, and they came down and they started, shaking things up. And as a result of Vanessa's case, the military has undergone some significant reforms. Most notably, they passed an act called the I Am Vanessa Guillén Act, which was signed into law in 2021, a year after. And the act now criminalizes, for the first time, it criminalizes sexual harassment. And it's moved the prosecution of these sexual assault and harassment cases outside of the military's chain of command. So now it requires an independent investigation by civilians and protections against retaliation for the victims. So now, if someone tries to retaliate for you speaking up, there are penalties that come with that. And beyond those legislative changes, the Army has also implemented something they call the People First Task Force. It addresses any toxic command climate, and it tries to improve safety and justice. And finally, there have been new protocols by the military, thanks again to the I Am Vanessa Guillén Act, new protocols established by the military to prioritize and investigate missing soldier cases. That's very different from the way, Vanessa's case was handled initially, which is rather slowly, and with little response for so long. They often declared these soldiers AWOL, absent without leave, and left it at that for too long a time. Now, new protocols mean that they can prioritize any case where a soldier has gone missing. So it's very clear that Vanessa Guillén's case and her death was not in vain.
Yeah, totally. And I love that there are these initiatives that are put in place to protect soldiers, and love the fact that there's even repercussions for individuals who will retaliate against those who speak out. But I'm wondering how frustrating or how the conversation is even presented when you see over the past few months the image of the military sort of being reframed as this hyper-masculine, toxic, without saying the word toxic to the media, this hyper-masculine environment. This situation is seeming to be reversed again.
Yeah, I mean, I can only say that there are members of the military who are worried, and Vanessa's family is too, about where things are headed now. There were some initial changes, and by the way, this happened also during the George Floyd case in the summer of 2020, when there were demands for accountability from not only law enforcement by the military, and that certainly helped the Vanessa Guillén case. But things can change on a dime, as we have learned, and we can only hope that these reforms remain in place, because it's a huge organization, the military. I mean, with millions of members, and this happens all too often.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Absolutely, yeah, and let's hope those changes stick. Now, how did the search for Vanessa end?
Well, they the authorities finally, when they found out that Aaron Robinson, they found out he was lying because they started tracing his phone and data from his cell phone. And they found out that he was not at home as he pretended to be that night. His phone pinged 30 miles away from Fort Hood by the Leon River several times. And it stayed there a little bit and then came back and then went back again. And so the authorities then started searching that area. And there was a group of a volunteer group of searchers called Aqua Search, and they are on horses often. And started by Tim Miller, this man who lost his own daughter, whose own daughter disappeared, not in the military, but years before. So he started this organization, Aqua Search, and they were searching in that area where Aronson's phone had pinged. And that's when they started discovering. First, they discovered one grave that had nothing to do with Vanessa. It belonged to someone else who had died, and was missing and had been misclassified as AWOL. But then a few days later, they find Vanessa's body, and she had been dismembered. Other soldiers finally testified that Aaron Robinson was seen leaving the base with a big old tough box, a big old plastic container box that can carry a body in it. But they saw him carrying it out, putting it in his car. That was a big tip to them. At the site there by the Leon River, they discovered 3 small grave sites. And eventually one of them had long hair, black hair, Vanessa, and they did some DNA testing and they confirmed. Ironically, it was at a time when the Guillen family, had gone to Washington to try to get answers there from Congress and President Trump. They confirmed then that, and she had been horribly dismembered. There were something you won't see in the podcast. Aaron Robinson's, took his own life, as I might have mentioned. But it turns out that his girlfriend at the time, Cecily Aguilar, also took part of this, and she started telling the police and then the authorities, the military authorities, what really happened. She confessed, and she said that she took part of it, that he had struck. He told her, and this is not in the podcast, but that he said that he killed Vanessa. He told his girlfriend, Aaron Robinson did, that he killed her with a hammer and threw her in that tough box, and then he called her to help him bury the body. So, and that there was necrophilia involved too. She confessed all this while she had Aaron Robinson on the phone, telling him that she was going to turn herself in. That's when Robinson got wind of the fact that a body had been found, and that's when he took his own life. But it was horrific, so bad, so badly decomposed and dismembered that Vanessa's family didn't want to tell their mother, Gloria, and she didn't learn about any of this until many weeks later, about exactly how her daughter died.
And so what was the, determination? What was the fate of Aguilar?
She went to trial. She pled guilty as an accessory to murder, and she received 30 years in prison. During her sentencing, and again, she confessed, she took the plea. Vanessa's mother asked to meet with her privately, and Cecily did. And Cecily, according to the family, told Gloria Guillen, "I've had a hard life, and I can only wish that I would have had a mother like you." Vanessa's sisters did not want to talk to this woman, but Vanessa's mother forgave her, and she said it's the Catholic religion and her adoration of the Virgin of Guadalupe that allowed her to forgive the woman who was convicted as playing a role in her daughter's murder. The sad thing is they never heard from Aaron Robinson. They never heard exactly how he did it or why he did it from him, because he took his own life.
Wow. Well, it is a tragic story, and we do really appreciate you spending some time with us here, John, and producing this podcast, Vanished: What Happened to Vanessa. It is great. It really sheds light on the entire story, and obviously these are stories that, while not exactly continue every day, these are situations that do happen across the world every day. So...
Yeah, and I just want to say one more quick thing for the listeners if they haven't checked it out. Even if you haven't looked into Vanessa's story, definitely look into it. I think a lot of people don't because it is so hard to process. I mean, there's so many parts of it that are so brutal, but what you just said about finding it in you to have forgiveness, I think that's a really, really important part to the whole thing, that no matter, I mean, it's coming from a mother too, like no matter how brutal and personal and directly affected you are, you can always make something better out of a tragic, really, yeah, I keep saying brutal, but just such a tragic situation. And that's what they tried to do. So it is an important story.
Thank you guys for helping me shine a light on this, Tim and Lance. It's been a real pleasure being with you.